This is Making Stitches, and I'm thrilled to be back with you for a brand new series. This time my guest is Felicity Ford, or Felix as she's also known. She's an artist who works with yarn, colour and sound. In her practice, Felix has taken a deep dive into celebrating and appreciating everyday things.
I feel like creativity has given me a very deep sense of being connected to my world and to all the things that are around me. And it's given me a huge amount of, there's always a feeling of accomplishment that comes from taking something like tarmac or your digital recorder that was just sort of this thing that was you took for granted, but that effort of kind of mining it and finding something amazing in it, there's like a great feeling of accomplishment in that, and you're different after doing that. It can never go back to just being that thing now it's like an important part of your life. So there's this sort of feeling of investment and cherishing of just the everyday stuff that's around me that I think is really hard to overstate how life affirming that is.
Hello there and welcome to Making Stitches. I'm so glad to be back with you, bringing you a brand new series of the podcast. 2025 is quite a significant year for me in the realm of Making Stitches. This year, my Making Stitches blog, which was once known as Postcard from Gibraltar, celebrates its 10th birthday, and Making Stitches podcast turns 5 later this year too. I'm hoping that this year will see me doing some new and interesting things, some of which already include starting my first ever crochet along over on my blog, and the second being a fabulous online course teaching me about the importance of colour and how you choose colours to put together in a project. That course was written by my guest, Felicity Ford, or Felix as she's also known. I first heard about Felix through a mutual friend of ours who I'd gone to school with. She messaged me one day and said I may be interested in Felix's work, and she was right. When I reached out to Felix, she insisted on sending me 2 of her books and a place on one of her online courses before speaking to me for the podcast so I could truly understand her and her work. One of the books, the Stranded Colourwork Project book, is a masterclass in looking at the everyday and turning it into beautifully patterned knitted colourwork, be that the patterns of brickwork on houses, tarmac on an A-road, or the label of a bottle of beer. Also in my pre-interview research, I stumbled across the KNITSONIK Podcast, which was produced around a decade ago and explores Felix's passion for yarn, knitting and sounds.
KNITSONIK, exploring the sonic world of wool.
KNITSONIK.com. KNITSONIK.
Late last year, we managed to get together online for a chat, and I absolutely loved speaking to Felix, and our conversation covered so many things from craft and creativity to audio and sound recording, an appreciation of the everyday and the colours around us, as well as music and Felix's experience of disability. Before you hear our chat, I want to share one of Felix's own songs. You can find quite a few of them woven through her KNITSONIK podcast, and this one pretty much sums up what drives her to do the work she does.
My research is in wool and sounds, that really is my thing. I make recordings, play with wires and do loads of knitting. I dream of circuit boards and charts when I lie down to sleep. And my favourite thing is to record the source of wool, the sheep. There are big bars and little bars, sad bars and greetings too. And sometimes if you get lucky, a sheep will bar for you. You can mix the sheep's bars with its wool for a great sense of place, and celebrate having hand knits with roots that you can trace. My research is in wool and sounds, that really is my thing. I make recordings, play with wires and do loads of knitting. I dream of circuit boards and charts when I lie down to sleep. And my favourite thing is to record the source of wool, the sheep. I do not like that we don't know where our clothes all come from. Where do the clothes that we all wear all go to when we're done? What happens to the plastic clothes, the ones they make from oil? Unlike sheep poo and wool fibres, they don't nourish the soil. My research is in wool and sounds, that really is my thing. I make recordings, play with wires and do loads of knitting. I dream of circuit boards and charts when I lie down to sleep. And my favourite thing is to record the source of wool, the sheep. What happens if you amplify the sound of spinning wheels? I like to think that you can hear the origins of reels. And spinning jennies and the mule in factories made the beat that moved clogs, once powered by thousands of workers' feet. Techno started with textiles, it started in the mills, ringing out throughout the north among the rugged hills.
First of all, Felix, thank you so much for this. I've been really looking forward to speaking to you, and thank you so much for sending through your books and the invitation to take part in your course. I feel like I almost know you already, even though this is our first chance to speak.
Oh, well, thanks very much for inviting me on your podcast. And how are you finding the course, first of all?
Yeah, I'm absolutely loving it. And, you know, just for people who are listening to this and aren't aware, it's called Colour at Play. And it's all about kind of putting colours together. Now, this is something I've struggled with, and I've always admired people who can put, you know, like a crochet blanket together, and it's as if they've just haphazardly thrown some colours together, and yet it looks absolutely amazing. And I can remember during lockdown doing a crochet along with my stash that I had and thinking, well, I'll have a great memento of this time kind of thing. I can't even look at it because it's got connotations with lockdown which aren't great, but also the colours and the way I put them together, they just make me feel uneasy when I look at them. And I thought, you know, finally, I don't know how to put colours together. And being able to do this course has made me realise that there are signals, there are clues all around us of showing us in nature, and even down to biscuit tins and labels on packets that, you know, somebody's already done the hard work for us. And I'm really enjoying it, Felix. Thank you.
I'm so happy to hear that. It's a weird thing with colour, because I do feel like there's this sort of idea of like, I'll just go and put some colours together for this thing. And it's kind of like if I said to you, like, make a dinner. And that's it. You're just faced with this total blank slate. Whereas if I say, oh, we've got some carrots and we've got like some butter and there's a bit of parsley, and then you've kind of got a few things to work with, and you're not just starting from a completely blank brief. But we expect ourselves to work from this totally blank brief with colour. And then also there's just this idea that you should just be good with them. But how can you get good at anything if you don't practice it?
Absolutely. So, yeah, got it.
That's exactly why I put the course together, to kind of provide all the practice and playing.
That's fantastic. Now, what's it been like? What's the reception been like? Because certainly looking at the comments, you've got people who appear to be from quite a wide sort of geographical area who've all signed up to it and taken part in it.
Yeah, so it's been great. Like, it's been the thing that's been really interesting for me is I kind of put this together. I suppose it's for everyone, but I was predominantly thinking of knitters, because most of my work in the last 10 years has been for knitters, and that's my kind of broadest customer or audience base. But recently here in St Leonard's, I was talking to another artist who has a studio where I have a studio, and she was saying she's a printmaker, and she was saying, oh, I don't really know what to do with colour. And we were just talking. I said, "Oh, just do this course, and like we can do a bit of a trade. I'll do some lino stuff with you because she's an amazing printmaker, and you can do my colours course." And she's absolutely loved it, which has made me think that I should kind of share it more with more artists and kind of push it out in that direction. And I think I've been a little bit. It's always weird with a self-paced course to know, are people going through it, or do they just do the first thing and then they're like, oh, I've got stuck, and then they don't progress. But looking from the back end of it, people do seem to be going through it, and there's quite good discussions underneath things. So I'm pleased with it. I do wonder if it might be something to think about next year, is kind of setting up something that's online and live, like a sort of online meeting where for just a bit of accountability and for people to kind of check in. Well, we can talk about that more later, kind of plans for the future. But that's definitely one thing that I have thought about since doing the course, since making it.
Well, can I just take you back in time to when knitting first came into your life? When did you learn, and who taught you?
I learnt when I was very small from my gran. Like a lot of people, I think. I remember this little strip of red garter stitch, and I did that classic beginner knitter thing of just not being confident about casting off the last stitch, so it just gets wider and wider. And I remember my gran was not the most patient person, and I remember her just taking it off me and saying, I'll just finish it, which sort of, destroyed the point of it a little bit. And then I picked it up again in my very late teens, and I did a little bit when I was living in Ireland. I lived in Ireland for 7 years, and then I didn't get properly back into it until I moved to Oxford and started my MA in sonic art and composition, and then was just wondering, where am I going to make friends who are the same age as me, and I always need to have some good women in my life. I just saw this sign for a knitting group, the Oxford Blue Stockings, and I went along, and there my pace and learning of knitting jumped up, because these were super talented women, mostly working for the Oxford University Press, and all doing like these super ambitious projects. And it really opened my eyes to, wow, there's a world here that I hadn't appreciated beyond like widening bits of garter stitch.
And it's thanks to one of those amazing women that we got together, an old school friend of mine, and now a friend of yours as well. So we've got to say thank you to Aliki for hooking us up.
Yes, shout out to Aliki.
So tell me a little bit about your masters then, because that sounds absolutely fascinating. It talks to me as a fan of audio, and obviously as a fan of yarn.
Yeah, so the MA was in sonic art and composition, and it was great because it was taught on it's not taught anymore, sadly, but it was a very interdisciplinary arts MA. So there were 4 MAs all taught together: contemporary art and music, social sculpture, and sonic art and composition. So what was great about that was that you weren't just in your own little silo, just only doing your thing. There was all this different arts practices influencing and inspiring each other. And I really loved it because I was just learning a lot about experimental sound. I was learning a lot about these very creative sonic practices, but then also with like social sculpture being taught as well, thinking a lot about the social contexts of things, not just sound in an abstract sense, but how is sound part of the fabric of society? How is sound part of telling human stories? And so it was this very fruitful time of learning all this stuff about art and sound, and also learning how to knit socks and how to turn a heel. And it was interesting because I was just getting to grips with recording technology, and people would often see me with like my microphone and be like, oh, that's very technical. And then they'd see me like in another context knitting a sock and say, well, that's very crafty. And I thought that was so curious, because to me, knitting a sock is much more technical than hitting record on my recorder. And all that stuff about like gender and technology, I was thinking about that a lot at the time. So yeah, that was my my MA, and my final project for that was the Miss Ability radio show, which was a radio. It wasn't really a radio show in that it wasn't broadcast, but it was like this idea of this fantasy radio show that was all about disability, and it was all about my own and my peer group experiences of disability. And what I hadn't seen in representations of disability anywhere was the irreverence, the creativity, the problem-solving skills, and the mischief that me and my friends with disabilities experienced. And I wanted to make that very present in a radio show. And then, yeah, alongside that, I had this knitted walking stick cozy competition, which was about using knitting to customise cozies for walking sticks. And that was really about how my own experience of using a walking stick was that people would see me and go, oh, what's wrong with you? Or, oh, what happened to you? And then when I covered it in yarn, they would be like, did you make that yourself? And I thought that was a much more interesting kind of a conversation. And there's something about being a crafter and a maker that is inherently problem solving, and I wanted to put that together with like, how do I survive as a disabled person, but in that really kind of proactive and creative way. So yeah, that was my sonic art and composition MA final project. And Aliki was there actually, because we had the judging of the walking stick cozy competition was kind of this conversation that I wanted to have about disability, where we had all the different cozies and we talked about them and how they relate to the disabled body, and also the joy and the expressivity and the personality of each one. So yeah.
How fascinating. Do you know, that's not something I'd ever thought about, the fact that you can just divert the conversation, take it down a completely different avenue just through decorating a walking stick. That's utterly remarkable.
And it's funny how somehow the kind of the grey NHS standard walking stick, it becomes this massive visible thing. And it becomes a symbol of disability, even though it's actually enabling you to walk. But then as soon as you kind of customise it, it's just part of you, and it's part of your outfit, and it matches your outfit. And it was a really interesting kind of project. I loved working on that.
Absolutely. I can see why. Now, you have a podcast as well.
Yes.
KNITSONIK Podcast. Is that something that came out of your MA?
So actually what happened then was I'd finished the MA, then I got this amazing treatment for arthritis, which massively reduced it managed my symptoms a lot better than previously. And what happens in art, I think, is that if you do one thing, then people are like, oh, she's the person who does that kind of thing. And I really didn't want to get pigeonholed as someone who just only makes work about disability, if that makes sense. Like, I am disabled, but I don't want that to be the whole thing. But working with sound and making those recordings had made me extremely aware that I wanted to do a lot more work with sound. And I did a PhD next on looking at everyday sounds and presenting. It was the domestic soundscape and presenting everyday sounds to audiences. And that was really about paying attention to these everyday sounds that surround us all the time and finding ways to show how rich and exciting they can be, instead of it just being like this background noise that we don't care about. It's like, can we do something exciting with this? And at that time, a lot of people in field recording would sort of get a grant to like go to the Amazon rainforest or the thawing Baikal ice lake or some sort of really exotic, tropical, otherly destination. And I just was like, why are we doing this colonial explorer project when we have our own everyday textures here that we could celebrate and examine. So yeah, I went on to do a PhD in that, and at the same time continued knitting. And somewhere along the way, in fact, I think it was when I was doing the write-up for the MA, I inadvertently booked myself to stay on a sheep farm where the person running the sheep farm was producing yarn from her sheep. And I was like, this is amazing. I want to buy the wool. And she said, it's quite expensive. And I was like, why is it so expensive when it's like £5 in John Lewis? Why is it like £20 to get it from you? And she explained all these layers to manufacture growing sheep, breeding sheep, that I just hadn't understood. And then, of course, as a person using sound to tell stories, which I'd been doing about disability, and now I was doing all this work about everyday sounds, I was like, maybe I could use sound to tell this story. So I made a podcast it was broadcast on Resonance FM through the Framework radio show. And that was my first sort of real KNITSONIK podcast, where I recorded starting with the sheep, and then recording the sounds of the sheep, and Julia doing the rounds with her sheep, and then going to the mill where Julia had her wool spun and recording that, and then recording the sounds of knitting with it, and just trying to tell that whole story of sheep and how wool starts in the land and then ends up on our needles. And that sort of just began to blossom into a much bigger interest about the connections between sheep and place and textiles. So yeah, and my podcast kind of that I had, I think I was doing my podcast 2013 to, I think the last one might have been 2016. There's a lot of those connections between sheep and land and wool that I kind of unpack in those podcasts.
Yeah, no,
but that was kind of the start of it. Yeah,
it's an absolutely fascinating listen. It's just lovely. It's the kind of listening that you can knit to, or just be pottering, and it kind of washes over you. All the soundscapes of being like at the Shetland Wool Week, or being out with your recorder Eddie, which features in many of the things that you've done. Not only is Eddie your Eddie Roll recorder that records the sounds for your podcasts, it also features in your stranded colour work as well. Do you want to explain a bit about that?
Sure. So doing this work that was about wool and place I ended up doing a couple of residencies. I did a few different projects in the Lake District, then in Estonia, and then at Shetland Wool Week, that were looking at these intersections between place and wool and textiles. And I started to feel a sort of homesickness for being in these very being in these places where there's a very emplaced sense of textiles, like in Shetland, where you can really be like, as a Shetlander, you can say, this is my heritage. This is the knitting of my culture. And in Estonia, the knits are even more kind of, there's like specific stripes on a woven skirt that say which village you're from, which area you're from. And there's all this kind of really rich connection between place and knitting. And that shows up in the sounds as well, because the sounds, for example, in Shetland, you can never record sheep without also recording seabirds, because it's such a coastal place. And so I started thinking, what textiles could I produce that would reflect a sense of my place in the world without taking from a different culture, or without kind of appropriating anyone else's textile language. I was like, well, I could make stranded colour work where I developed the patterns and the motifs by really paying attention to things that are a big part of my everyday life. And of course, the Edirol sound recorder, which has been on all these adventures and done all these sound art commissions and been involved in my work for years and years, it's like a big part of that. And I wanted to put that in the KNITSONIK Stranded Colourwork source book, because I feel like there's a lot of ideas of what inspiration looks like. It's like, let's do a sunset, let's do a Van Gogh painting. And I really wanted to show, no, you can just take a little beaten up plastic consumer electronics product and make it meaningful through your work of observing it and looking at it and finding its patterns and its palettes and its shapes and its colours. And I wanted to show that you could do that with anything. And so that's what led to me then publishing the KNITSONIK Stranded Colourwork sourcebook.
Which, I mean, it's quite remarkable that where you find your inspiration, right down to the road that you used to drive on regularly. And it certainly looks like a nice kind of country lane almost in places. So you've got your greenery, but there's not, to somebody just quickly looking at it, it doesn't look that remarkable. Yet, as you say in your book, it completely ruined tarmac for your husband, the different shades of grey that you found in the tarmac of this particular A road.
Yeah, that was an interesting one, because for my PhD, one of my big final projects, or the last one I did when I was working on my PhD, was called Around the A4074. And it was because I was at that time living in Reading with Mark, my husband, and then driving to Oxford to do my PhD all the time. And I added it up and it was something insane. Like, I've spent like 30 weeks of my life on this road when you add up all the hours. It was like this phenomenal amount of time. And I was like, and I never really, so it's this huge part of my life, but I've never looked at it. And so I wanted to have this experience of like fully examining and exploring and celebrating the road. And then I wanted to get the radio show broadcast on BBC Oxford, so that someone would be driving on that road and they'd be listening to this like, what is this person talking about? They're just talking about this road. And then be like, hang on, they're talking about this road, because loads of people do that commute along the A4074. And I just thought, how magic would that be if someone had that experience and they would never think about the road in the same way again once they had all these little stories about it. So yeah, that was my final thing. And again, like, I'd spent all this time on the road. So when I was working on the book, I was like, well, the road has to go in there. But it was quite sometimes like a deadline, and pressure is just what you need to force your hand. And I was quite panicking because I had folders and folders and folders of photos and all of this audio. I just panicked, and I was like, I don't know where to start, because it's just too big. It's too big as an inspiration source. And just heading there with like my telephoto lens on my camera and just being like, right, we've got to narrow this down. And I was like, we'll stop looking at the view because there's too many views. We'll just look at the road, just pay attention to the road. And that was when I was just like, none of the tarmac is this presumed grey colour that you think of when you think about a road. There's pink bits and there's like dark bits where it's been patched. There's turquoise bits, there's grey bits. The white paint is different depending on when it's been painted. And that was just the starting point for, okay, I can do road markings and I can show all the nuance of this texture that I've spent countless hours driving on and never paid attention to before. And now, yeah, it's ruined. It's never just the road now. It's got all these layers. And there was a really exciting day where they completely resurfaced the road where I used to live. And I think most people would just not think about that at all. But for me, it was so exciting because I was like, this is how it's made. This thing I've invested all this time into looking at and appreciating and noticing. It's like, this is how it's made. This is how the road is born.
Oh, that's fantastic. Who would have thought? But I mean, the thing is, it's wonderful. You can find such inspiration in everyday mundanity, really, can't you? I mean, it's there. You've just got to look for it. And it's certainly inspired some of the things that I've done with yarn when I've done, crochet alongs for blankets and things. And rather than just do random colours, having, actually before I made the mistake of the pandemic blanket, I was inspired of where I was living in Gibraltar, and I used the colour of the rock and the colour of the trees and the beaches and the sea and all that kind of thing. And you just see it every day, or I did back then, not at the moment. But yeah, you can really get huge inspiration by your surroundings.
I think we have a tendency particularly where we live, to kind of just go, oh, that's just that. Like, that's just the view from my house. That's just, and we never take pictures of it because we see it every day. So we just, and in a way, you can just like miss that whole process of paying attention.
Can I take you back to when you were young and you had an art lesson which taught you about the subtleties of colour when you see it?
Oh, this is one of my favourite stories ever. This is like I had saved up some money so I could get art classes with Pat Franco, who was it was one of my dad's patients, and he was a GP, and he had all these community contacts, and he was like, my daughter really wants to learn how to do oil painting, and they weren't going to teach it at school for ages. So I was like, brilliant. I went along to her with my little money that I'd saved up and had my art lesson. And I was so excited that we were going to do oil painting. And I'm thinking like Titian, like we're going to have great big colours and it's going to be massive. And she had this little basket of eggs, and was like, today we're going to do colour mixing. And I was so disappointed. I was just like, you have got to be kidding me. Like, I'm not. It's like, I haven't come this far to paint this boring eggs. And she showed me, she was like, okay, you're going to mix the colours and you're going to use a palette knife, because with the palette knife, you mix the colour, but then you can hold it up and you can compare the colour that you can see on the palette knife with the colour on your painting. And I, impatient little young teenage, was just like, yeah. So I went mixy. And I was like, right, I've done it. I've done the egg colour. This is the colour of the eggs. And she came, and it was this sort of like a kind of smudgy Caucasian foundation kind of colour that I'd made. And she just looked at it, and so kindly and so patiently, she said, now remember what I said, you have to hold up the palette knife, and compare it to the eggs. And she was like, can you see that colour that's on your palette knife anywhere in the eggs? And I couldn't. It was like a made up colour that I just, in my head, my imagination, my prejudice, I was like, that's the colour of eggs. But the eggs were green and blue and pink and white. And after my initial, like, oh, I can't believe you're making me do something so boring, I think it was the most absorbing and life-changing experience. And I really remember just being so fascinated by all this. It was like I'd just never seen them before. I'd never seen the colours. And it was a real, like, one of those moments where you're like, okay, the world never is going to look the same after this now.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
That's incredible. What a valuable lesson to learn, though. And it's so true. You have your blinkers on, don't you? You just assume, and you shouldn't. You need to look a little bit deeper, don't you?
Yeah, it's the same. Oh, that's just that.
Yeah, just like the view out your window.
That's just eggs. That's just the colour of eggs. But there's no colour of eggs. It's nonsense. And it's stayed with me, and it has really stayed with me.
Now, I've got to mention music because that features quite heavily in your podcast. So as well as learning oil painting, presumably you were having music lessons as well.
That's actually how I made the money to pay for the art lessons, was I was teaching all the younger kids how to play flute and how to play piano, which I was learning at the time. And I have always loved music. I've always loved playing music. I've always really, it's something that comes very naturally to me, and it's very joyous. And I associate it massively with like my family. My dad has always played all the brass instruments. All my brothers play something. My mum plays French horn. And so growing up, there was always a lot of music making. And yeah, so I think it's an interesting thing, but it's like, for instance, when I went to Shetland it was a sound project that I was doing there called Listening to Shetland Oo, which is the Shetland word for wool. And I made a sound map, and I went round and I was documenting all these different sounds that are part of the woolly, industrial, cultural, working landscape of Shetland. And I put them all on, it's a sound map project called Appery, run by my friend Udo Knoll. And you can just travel around the map and click on areas and hear, like, oh, that's the Shima machines churning out knitwear in the Sandness factory, or there's Hazel Tyndall knitting with a belt, or there's Elizabeth Johnston spinning on an old Shetland wheel. And at the end of doing that project, the thing was that I felt like it was something more than an art project, that I had genuinely fallen in love with Shetland. And the only way to commemorate that was to write a song. And it was like it's just an accordion song, and I'm not very good on the accordion. It just gives me enough chords to put a tune over. So I wrote this Shetland Wool Week song, and I walked to the Shetland wool brokers and just sang it to them. And there's something so sort of sincere and immediate about just singing a song or making a song for somebody. And I've always kind of kept it a bit separate from like sound art, because it's not necessarily something that would make sense in that fine art context. But on a human being level, it's just like, I love you and I've written you a song. And that energy definitely runs over into the podcast.
I live in Reading and I visited these isles, and I'm blown away, but not just by your textiles. Intricate, fair, insanely good lace, but also a deep sense of connection with place. A feeling that landscape and wool grow together, surrounded by ocean and shaped by the weather. Stories of fishing and knitting entwined, a high street of knitwear that will blow your mind. And if places were graded and sorted for knits, for gloves, socks and mittens and hand-dyed yarn kits, then Shetland would surely get the top grade for all of the mucking and all that gets made. I live in Reading with my cat and my man, and I love it there, but I do hope I can return here often to listen to turns, to go up on the peak hills and hear the birds, to visit the wool brokers and puff the wool fumes, to listen to Shima machines record the looms, and revel in knowing that the Shetland Isles are still rocking the world with amazing textiles. That unlike in some other parts of the UK, the wool industry here is still thriving today. That people here still know that knitwear is hip, so the crofter can earn some money for the clip. And if places were graded and sorted for their wool, then Shetland would be an ace, 1 star and full marks. And I am so happy to be here to share this wonderful textile that we should all wear.
That, of course, was the end of Felix's love letter to Shetland song. You can hear the full version on the KNITSONIK podcast in the Shetland Diaries episode. Now back to our chat, and I asked Felix what she was working on currently.
So I'm kind of in a bit of a research phase at the minute, because I've had, I've got problems now with my hands, where from having arthritis for such a long time, I've now got like quite a lot of permanent damage in my wrist, and that means I cannot knit at the level that I was knitting at to produce first the Stranded Colourwork source book, then the KNITSONIK Stranded Colourwork playbook. And even working, because all of my Stranded Colourwork is iterative, and I'm like looking at the inspiration source, developing the motif, knitting it, reviewing it, and working in that way. Like, it would be very difficult to do that with someone else doing the knitting for me. It's just not something I feel I can outsource. So I'm trying to work out where's the best place to put my energies. And I've also found in recent years, so after the book came out, which was 10 years ago in 2014, I got a lot of invitations to teach people my creative methods for turning everyday life into stranded colourwork. And then when the pandemic hit, that was obviously all that work completely ground to a halt. And also with I find traveling very taxing and I don't like doing it. And I had a couple of people write to me and say, hey, I'm disabled and it's really hard for me to come to Edinburgh or Shetland or any of these places I was teaching in. Would you consider teaching me online? So this thought of doing an online school had been in my mind for a long time. And in 2020, I started my school. And for the last 4 years, I've been running that school, producing all the content for that school, also running my shop, also all of those things. And it's too much. And so I really want to focus on the school. And I'm really wondering, what's the best thing to do next? So in there at the minute, there's KNITSONIK bullet journaling, which is my very messy, creative approach to bullet journaling, non-perfectionist, look after yourself, have a lovely time. That's kind of KNITSONIK bullet journaling. Then there's the KNITSONIK system, which is my flagship course that takes you through my creative process. Colour at Play, which is the course that you're doing, which is in a way is kind of like a good primer for the KNITSONIK system because it teaches you a lot of ways of looking at colour. And there's also a course on there called Yarnadelic Remixes, which is super niche. It's about using music boxes. You can get these music boxes that work with punch cards, and then you can do two things. You can punch knitting patterns like Fair Isle charts or charts you've made up onto punch cards and then play them through the music box and hear them. Or you can do what me and my collaborator for that project, Muriel, did, which is you can take music, put it, punch it onto the cards to put through the music box and then see what can we find there that we can knit. So we did it. It's knitted music. So yarn, and it's not really a course because I couldn't take on teaching people how to write music and how to transcribe things for music box. I was that is too much of a thing to try and do online. But Teachable just was the best place to put that because there was so much audio visual content, and I love making the videos, but it's very time consuming. It takes me about 6 months to build a course. So yes, so it was a very long way to say I'm in a research phase and I'm trying to work out what is the most amazing thing that I can do with my school for 2025 and what would people really like. So if any of your listeners, if you're listening to this right now, if you have suggestions for what should be in the KNITSONIK school, I would love to hear them.
How fantastic. Oh, it sounds really exciting to be in that position where really anything could happen.
Yeah, I feel like the lesson from the last few years where I've overdone stuff is that I can do many things, but I can't do everything. So it's finding what is the thing or the few things that I can put my energy on. And I really am very passionate about teaching. I love sort of giving people tools and sharing things. And I suppose I've had so many amazing moments like the one I described earlier with my teacher and the eggs. If I can pass on the gift of you can see things differently, you can find more, you can discover more, then I'm happy. I feel like my time on earth has been well spent.
How fantastic. What, are you knitting something at the moment? Do you have anything on your needles at the moment?
No, I took a long time to make. I've made some sparkly leg warmers and I've made a hat, and that's all I've knit this year because my hands have just been so not up to it.
Oh, wow.
And I did start a swatch. I don't know where he is at the minute. I always have. I'll be back in 1 second. I can show you the swatch I've been working on. I've not got very far with it, but in the Colour at Play course, it's just like that at the minute. It's just a tiny little swatch. But in the Colour at Play course, you may have seen, I think it's in one of the Make a Palette exercises, I've took that Lisa Congdon designed deck of cards that's all about choosing your values and identifying what you care about and what's important to you. And I love the colours. And I put together a yarn palette inspired by those cards. And I really wanted to see, can I translate them into stranded colour work? And there's another one on the needles. But this is like the worst kind of knitting for me because it's little tiny needles and it's 4-ply or fingering weight yarn. And the thing is, I've just been knitting with this for 10 years without varying it at all. So I need more double knit projects and chunky knit and just different weights. And then hopefully I'll get the capacity together to finish my swatches. And that's the other one that I'm working on. It's just it's a speed swatch, which is Janine Bejes's technique.
Oh, that's lovely.
It's basically for checking transitions between colours. You just do a diagonal line and then you just sequence your colours. So there I've got there's like a sequence of greens that goes from very saturated and intense right through to this very muted colour. And then there's purples that go from like blue through to like purple.
Yes.
And then just seeing where the line breaks, you haven't got enough contrast between pattern and background. But where the line remains, you get these really nice fadey effects and you think, oh, I could do something amazing with that in stranded colour work. So yeah, a couple of tiny swatches, 1 hat and 2 leg warmers. That is the sum total of my 2024 knitting.
Oh, do you find it hard not being able to knit?
Yeah, it took me a while to realise that I am actually really upset about it. And because I was just like, it's fine, I'll just pivot, I'll just do something different. But I am sad about it. And I made this double knit hat recently and it gave me a lot of joy to just quite quickly go from yarn to a finished thing. And I was like, no, I needed that actually. I was feeling very sad. Just need to have that outlet. So yes, it is a loss. And what I've found over years of living with arthritis is that you can't rush it. Like there's definitely a whole period of this year where I was just sulking because my hand hurt and I was just really sad that I had lost the thing. And like, I think it's very important to make space for that grief. And then you get to the problem solving phase of like, okay, I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do. And it's part of I think it's one of the things that just always brings you back to yourself when you're just like, I don't know how to deal with this, but then you find a solution and it's so empowering when you do. But yeah, you can't rush it. You can't force that one really.
No, not at all. Oh, well, I hope you find a way through it before too much longer.
Thank you.
So what has yarn and colour brought to your life, would you say?
So many things. Most of all, I think for ages I've been saying I'm an artist and I work with knitting and sound. But I think that actually what I'm really interested in is attention and how we pay attention to things. And I've ended up working in these two mediums because they're both really excellent for focusing your attention. You know yourself, like if you're knitting, then you're in this state where there's a rhythm to what's happening and there's this gratification of something growing on your needles, but it's quite slow and you get these long windows of time to listen to a book or to watch a film or just to think your thoughts. And likewise with sound, going around and listening to sounds, you're in a state of receptiveness and paying attention. And listening is both the physical act of paying attention with your ears, but it's something that you do with it's a whole mode of attention as well. And I feel like creativity has given me a very deep sense of being connected to my world and to all the things that are around me. And it's given me a huge amount of, like, there's always a feeling of accomplishment that comes from taking something like Tarmac or your digital recorder that was just sort of this thing that was you took for granted, but that effort of kind of mining it and finding something amazing in it, there's like a great feeling of accomplishment in that, and you're different after doing that. It can never go back to just being that thing now it's like an important part of your life. So there's this sort of feeling of investment and cherishing of just the everyday stuff that's around me, that I think is really hard to overstate how life affirming that is, to just like be really connected to the things that are around you, and to have all these lovely little everyday stories that you can tell. Like, you can go walking down I don't know if you've done this yet, but there's like an exercise in the Colour at Play course where you put paint chips in your pocket and you just try and find matches for them. Like, you can do that with anyone and it will be magic and funny and joyous, and you'll never see the street that you've done that down in the same way again after having those experiences. So, and I feel like finally creativity creates a record, both like a sonic record and a knitted one, of my time on earth, you know, all of those experiences and memories that are stitched into a garment. And when I listen to a field recording I've made, I remember where I was standing, how I was feeling, if I was cold, what the weather was like, where the sun was in relation to me. And I love having that detailed, high resolution kind of record. Yeah.
I can so identify with that. That is so true.
There must be recordings that you just put them on and you're like, oh, I'm back in Gibraltar.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even when I was a reporter back in the day, many, many years ago, and the feeling of trepidation going in to speak to somebody that you were a bit frightened of, or you didn't know what questions you were going to ask of. And yeah, you are transport. It's the same though, like if you hear a piece of music or something, the first time you hear it, you can, you know, when you hear it again, sometimes you are transported back to that place. You know what road you were driving down when it first came on the radio and what the weather was like and all that kind of thing. It really does transport your sound, doesn't it?
I think there's something about the time. Like, it takes time to listen to a phrase in a piece of music or to listen to 30 seconds of audio. And that time, it kind of gives you like a bigger window for remembering. And I think photos can do it in a certain way, but there's something so quick about just an image and the way we see an image. Whereas with sound, it takes 30 seconds to listen to 30 seconds of sound. You can't rush it. It's slow, just like knitting, slow.
We like slow. Oh, Felix, thank you so much for your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking to you. I found it absolutely fascinating. And, you know, thanks again for sending your books through and getting me onto your course. It's I'm working on a project. Next year is a big year for my blog, Making Stitches. It'll be 10 years old. And I want to do something to mark that. And I think this colour course is going to help me in what I want to do. So I shall keep you posted on that. And it's certainly something I'll be blogging and talking about a bit more in future.
Please do. That would be so beautiful. If there was anything in my course that helps you celebrate 10 years of your blog, I would be just so happy to enable that.
Well, thank you so much, Felix. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's been so great speaking to you.
Huge thanks to Felix for taking the time to speak to me for Making Stitches podcast. It was such a thrill to learn about her fascination around colour, sound, music, and the beauty of everyday things. Thanks also to Felix for allowing me to use some of her own music in this podcast episode too. If you'd like to find out more about Felix and her work, you can find a link to the KNITSONIK website in the show notes for this episode. Thank you to you too for listening. It's so good to be back with you again. I'm really looking forward to sharing more inspiring creative chats with you soon. If this is your first time listening though and you want to hear more, there are over 80 episodes for you to have a go at in the Making Stitches back catalogue. Making Stitches podcast is a passion project for me. If you'd like to support me in my work with this podcast, you could make a donation through my Ko-fi page. There's a link to this in the show notes too. You could leave a nice rating or review on your podcast app where you're listening to this, or you could share this episode with someone who you think would enjoy hearing it. Thanks again for listening. I'll be back with you in 2 weeks' time with more creative chat. Until then, do look after yourself. and enjoy your crafting.